So we're talking today about German citizenship, which you specialize in and have a very good understanding of. Me, not so much, so I'll be guided by what you're going to tell us today. But basically what I wanted to ask you is just a little bit of very basic information for those of us who know very little about the process. What is the basic principle of citizenship through descent in Germany? How does that work?
The basic principle is that you have ancestors who were German and that they were German at the time that the next generation was born. So that's sort of the key to citizenship by descent.
Okay, so in other words, when you look at someone's eligibility, you would look at, what year were they born, where were they born, and who their direct ancestors are and how to connect them to Germany, yeah?
Exactly.
And Emily, is there a limit of generations or timelines? Like how far back can you go?
We go back to 1904 for people who lived overseas. So if your ancestors left, they must have left after 1904.
Mm-hmm. And Germany, of course, has a very complex history. And I think everything we're talking about, we need to put into the context of that history and legislation of how, not just legislation, but how the borders change and how the state itself changed, right?
Yeah, it's very complicated. So it's sort of different parts of Germany now in Poland and things like that. So it's a difficult process.
It is. And of course, Germany just recently introduced some new laws, and there's quite a bit of confusion still around that because the German laws, I guess it's fair to say, were quite restrictive, and they've now made them a bit more flexible. Can you take us through what happened?
The first major change they made was to restitution, which is making up for past atrocities during the NS period. So this is basically for people who were persecuted but didn't fit the narrow definition that it used to be, which was that you had your citizenship taken away. So now if you left Germany due to being persecuted but didn't have your citizenship technically taken away, you can still get citizenship back even if your ancestors naturalized in another country.
And Emily, is it also the case that even if you did not hold German citizenship, you can reclaim it? Can you explain to us what that's about?
So there's one clause that's been brought in the new section 15, and it basically says if you lived in Germany before 33 and you weren't German, or your ancestors weren't German, but they were persecuted from between 33 and 45, you can still claim German citizenship because of the persecution. They were unable to gain German citizenship. Mm-hmm. So they're sort of going back and saying, even if you were Polish or your ancestors were Polish, we're going to give you German citizenship because that's what you're entitled to.
Okay, because you could have got it if the laws weren't so restrictive, right?
A lot of the time it's more for Jewish ancestors. So they were forbidden from getting German citizenship after 33. So.
But there were other categories, of course, I guess the German legislation as it stands today, it's more embracing and more flexible in that regard. Definitely. And so what would you say are the main pathways? And we've mentioned one, which is restitution. So descendants of people who were subject to oppression. Yep. What are the other avenues of gaining citizenship for Germany?
So there's also determination of citizenship, which we spoke at the start about, which is that your ancestors were German and passed on the German citizenship. Then we've got declaration, which is also part of the new law, which means that if your mother was German at the time of your birth and you're born after 49 and before 75, you can still get German citizenship through the female lineage, which wasn't possible before. Mm-hmm. Then we've got the two restitutions, so the constitutional restitution, which is very limited, and now the broadening of the restitution under 15. Then we've got naturalization, which means you've got ancestors that were German but somehow lost German citizenship and were unable to pass it along. And it's a more complicated process and more involved, but at the end of the day, like, it's a pathway to German citizenship if that's what people really want to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that requires learning of the language and I guess, showcasing a very, very strong connection to the German diaspora in Germany and all kinds of like significant contribution that you may have made to Germany. So essentially what happens is when people come to us, what is the first thing we do if they know or think that they have German ancestry and they might potentially be eligible for German citizenship?
We have them fill out a family tree, which I then look at, and I look at naturalization dates and where ancestors were born and when ancestors were born, and which ones held German citizenship. And from there, I can usually determine whether or not someone is eligible for German citizenship for one of the many pathways that we offer.
Mm-hmm. So it would be therefore very important to be as precise as you can and provide as much information and documentation as you can. But what happens if there's scanned documentation? Can we assist people, and what happens with that?
We can provide research for documents that are in Germany. So sort of your grandparents, birth certificates, marriage certificates, even residential records we can source from the German archives. So any documentation that's required to support it that comes from Germany, we're able to source.
Mm-hmm. And what's our success rate with that? Would you say that Germany has good, complete records, or are they fragmented? What's the experience with that?
Archives are usually very organised. Due to the war, some archives lack information. We've also just had a case where, due to the floods this year, documents have gone missing or aren't attainable because they're being restored and things like that. So it sort of depends on where you're looking. But any documentation that potentially was destroyed doesn't have to be provided. So you provide the letter from the archive that these records were destroyed when you apply.
And of course, some records exist outside of Germany. So in the country of immigration, so let's say Australia or Canada or the US, there are records that we can source, or we can help clients source in order for them to back up their claim, I guess, because it's one thing to be eligible, it's another to actually have documentation to prove it, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so just to summarize, there are several pathways now to German citizenship because the laws have been made somewhat more flexible. And if anyone is interested in pursuing it, they can contact us. Our contact details will be in the comments box below. I do want to ask you just one last question, and you know, because I kind of manage our Facebook page, and a lot of the times I'll get questions like, oh, I didn't know that you could hold dual citizenship in Germany, or Germany allows German citizenship. So that's my question to you.
Germany does allow dual citizenship. Once you have German citizenship, you will have to fill out forms to apply to retain German citizenship, but they do allow it a lot of the time. And
so some people that have renounced their citizenship to become, I don't know, American or US or Australian citizens, there's a process now to get it back as well. Is that right? That's somewhat
There's a naturalization process that they can go through to potentially reclaim their German citizenship.
All right. Emily, as always, I have learned a lot from you, so thank you for your time. And if anyone has questions, you can contact us. And as Emily said, the first step is always to check if you qualify, and we try to be as precise as we can. We do not want you to waste your time and money on something that's not achievable. So the first step, which is always free for us, for any potential clients, is to look into your family history and check that you do qualify, and then we map out a way of getting there. And as Emily mentioned, there's several different pathways nowadays. So that's there you go. That's us done, Emily.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you so much for your time.